A witch with a creepy smile and bloody teeth offered Parveen milk to drink, while another evil entity smashed Aslam's bike into pieces. While you may think that you're brave enough to handle these real horror stories, get ready for the ultimate dark ride into the world of creepy activities. From burning witches to bloody towels found in washrooms, these true scary stories have been collected from various parts of Pakistan and are bound to give you the worst scare ever. But before getting engrossed in these stories, like and subscribe to the channel for more interesting stuff. My mother told us a scary story that actually happened to her years back. Just listening to the horror story made the hair on my neck stand up. It was the time when my elder sister had just been born, and my mother was recovering from childbirth. In those days, we lived in Rawalpindi, Pakistan, which was more like a village back then. One day, my mother was lying on the veranda or the porch, and my sister was with her. They used to spend their evenings in the open because it was really hot inside the house, and we didn't even have an AC back then. It was about sunset when my mother called my nanny, or grandmother, and asked her to bring a glass of milk. Barely 2 minutes passed before my mother felt someone near her. My grandmother was inside, and no one else was present at the time. My mother's body jerked, and she saw a tall man wearing a full white dress holding a bowl of milk in her hands. Her face showed a creepy smile and bloody teeth. She tilted her head to the right slightly and said in a spooky voice,
"Here's your milk, Parveen."
She spoke my mother's name, and my mother, who was shocked in her place, screamed loudly at that moment. My grandmother came rushing out and immediately said some prayers. The churail or ghost vanished. We used to live in Karachi, Pakistan, when paranormal and scary things started to happen to us. We bought a house but soon discovered that this place was a hub of angry spirits and evil ghosts. One day, my daughter came running to me in the middle of the night, screaming wildly. I calmed her down and asked what had happened. She told me she had seen a woman with blank white eyes and long hair standing at the side of her bed. I told her it might have been a nightmare, but she refused. After a few days, the same incident happened. However, this time, she saw a man wearing a black shawl-wear kameez sitting beside her on the bed. She told me that he looked just like her father. One moment, she was working alone in the room, and then he appeared out of nowhere with his face right next to hers. This story gives me the creeps as well. Then one night, my husband and I were on the roof of the house when I heard running footsteps on the roof. I looked around, but there was no one. I also listened to the weeping noises of a woman. I thought it might be my neighbors, but after some time, I looked around and saw that there was no one in my neighborhood. Then, I came to the other side of the roof and looked at my porch. I saw the shadow of a woman sitting on the ground with her head on her knees, weeping. Bloodstains were on her back, and her shrieks grew wilder with every second. The incident made me so frightened that we decided to leave the house. The night before the shift, a woman with a smile that made my heart skip a beat appeared right in front of me. She asked if I wanted to come with her and laughed spookily. We left the place urgently, rented a house for 2 months, and then sold this one. I still hear those shrieks in my dreams. This true incident happened back in 1988 when we bought a new house in Karachi, Pakistan. The house was big and cheap. My parents and I were glad we bought it. Everything went normally for 4 months until strange things started happening. On one of the nights, I was sound asleep when I felt someone standing on my back. It was as if someone were stomping with heavy feet. I was so frightened that I ran to my mother's room. She didn't really believe my story when I told her about it. The next night, I kept hearing footsteps on our roof. My mother also heard it and went to check twice but saw nothing. However, things became worse the day my father announced he would be coming late that night. The next day, he had a high fever and nothing helped. He went for a checkup, but the doctors did not know what the issue was. The situation continued for 3 months until things really started to get out of hand. My father occasionally left the house and wouldn't return for hours. He would lie by the gutter and eat stale food, and we had to ask our uncle to bring him back to the house. He wouldn't remember a single thing when he would wake up the next day. One day, my father's friend came to meet him. He took one look at my father and announced that something was wrong with him. He had knowledge about these things and told us that a witch possessed him. That occurred the day when my father came back late at night, and his perfume attracted the witch. She possessed him, and after 2 whole weeks of treatment, she finally let him be free. After that, we sold the house and bought a new one away from it. This true horror story happened to my cousin, who had gone to meet her aunt in those days. She said that she saw a sinister sight the first night she spent there. While she was in her bedroom, getting ready to sleep for the night, she saw a shadow creeping behind her. She quickly turned around and saw the woman in a black dress and long black hair staring at her. The woman was standing by the closet, just 2 feet away from her. My cousin's blood turned cold, and she stood transfixed on the spot. However, the next thing she saw scared her out of her wits. The ghost smiled at her, which made the scratches on her face even more visible. Unable to bear it anymore, my cousin screamed at the top of her lungs and rushed outside. She went to tell her aunt and found out that the place was haunted and such things happened normally. It had been barely 5 seconds of interaction with a terrifying ghost, but the memory still haunts my cousin to this day. If you find these scary stories interesting, then like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your support matters. We had a tenant in the annex of our house when I was a 16-year-old girl. She had been living with us for about 27 years, meaning she was with us even before I was born. She was married, but her husband remarried and lived with a second wife. Thus, the tenant spent her time alone in her room and occasionally came to meet us. Everything was going fine until it was time to arrange a marriage for my brother. We planned for him to live in the annex separately, so we asked the tenant to leave. We gave her 6 months to leave, but she never agreed. What should have been a good ending to a long relationship turned bitter. The tenant did not want to leave, but things became ugly when my father put his foot down. We really needed the place, but the tenant clearly warned us that she would not forgive us and strange things would happen to us. The next day, while I was lying on my bed ready to sleep, I heard screeching noises of nails on my glass in my room. That noise made it really difficult to sleep. The creepy thing was that my room was exactly next to the tenant's, and the tenant's warning rewound in my head as the screeching noise continued. I told my parents about the noise, but they said it must have been mice in the tenant's room. She'd kept the area so dirty that rats and cockroaches were extremely common at her place. Although I did not agree with that, I kept quiet. The noises continued since that day, and once, in the dead of the night, I also saw a woman standing right in front of me. I screamed, but she vanished right there. A few days later, my mother found a white towel soaked in blood in the washroom. Things were becoming extremely creepy and sinister. Whenever we saw the tenant, she was reading something and occasionally blew over us. Later, it was figured out that she was cursing our whole family, doing black magic on us. My father forced her out of the house, and we did treatment to break the curse. Nothing happened again, but I still have haunting nightmares to this day. My grandparents told me the story when I was a kid, and I still remember it to this day. The incident is so scary and climactic that it gives me goosebumps whenever I think about it. It's about my great-grandmother when she was 16. That was in 1947, when there was a mass migration from India to Pakistan, as Pakistan had been created. The Muslims traveled in groups at night. The women stayed inside the tents looking after children, while the men guarded them. One night, while everyone was resting, my great-grandmother saw a silhouette of a woman walking freakily toward the tents. Everyone was inside, so she was frightened about who the intruder was. Just as she was thinking, the ghost of a woman with long hair and a stained white shirt appeared in the tent. She moved hastily towards my great-grandmother, and my great-grandma screamed out of pure fright. Everyone woke up, and the men came inside the tent just in time to catch the churel or evil ghost. My great-grandma was saved, and the churel was tied while she screamed hysterically. One woman advised to burn her down, because she was attracting others of her sort with her wild screams. All the animals in the area were also making so much noise. The men burnt the screaming churel, and they packed their things to move to another spot. My grandma had become paralyzed after giving birth to her youngest daughter. My mother was her eldest daughter, had to perform all the household chores and take responsibility for all tasks. While my grandma could not move any longer, my mother, who was 19 at the time, handled everything nicely. One day, while she was cleaning the house, she found a gold coin in the corner of her room. This was surprising because nobody in the house had a gold coin, and the coin could not have come from outside. Anyway, she picked it up and kept it in her cupboard. From then on, she found gold coins at the same corner daily. When she told Grandma about it, she said that it was good jinns or entities. They gave her the gold coins. However, she should not give them to anybody else. My mother started storing them in a jar. A few days passed, and the coal in the house finished. In those days, coal was used to light fires and cook food. There was no money in the house, so my mother took some coins from the jar. She gave them to the shopkeeper and got the coal in return. From then onwards, my mother never got a gold coin again, but the shopkeeper became the wealthiest person in town. My grandma can see spirits and ghosts, and my mother tells really scary stories about what happened to her. My mother was a teenager when she and my grandma lived in Karachi. My grandfather had died. One day my grandmother was out of the house. There was no one except my mother at home when something freaky happened. My mother was doing her tasks when suddenly she saw a shadow rush up the stairs. My mother stared for a minute, but continued her work, thinking it might be her dog. However, a few minutes later, the dog was standing at the foot of the stairs, barking like a maniac. He looked up the stairs and continued, and even though my mother tried to quiet him down, he didn't. Then suddenly, something crashed upstairs and my mother was scared. Thinking someone might be in the house, she took a knife and went upstairs. There was no one, but the picture frame of my grandfather had been broken. When my grandma came back, my mother told her about it. My grandma said that the previous owner of this house and his family had been burnt. It was their spirits that haunted this place. My grandfather had done so because those people had illegally taken over the place and claimed it to be theirs. 2 days after they were burnt, my grandfather also died, and wild spirits roamed this house. Although I, Aslam Rama, is now 30, this scary story still gives me chills. It happened 5 years ago when I lived in Gujarat, Pakistan. That day, I went to the market to buy some things for my grandma. It was late at night as I drove my Honda bike on empty streets. Coming back, I encountered something strange. In the middle of the street stood a strange figure. She was a woman wearing a white kurta, which is a long shirt. She had long black hair that went down to her feet and covered her face. She stood in the middle of the street, blocking my way, and wore no shoes or socks. A graveyard was nearby, and there were rumors that wild spirits and eerie phenomenon occurred there. I was so petrified that I dropped my bike and ran as fast as possible towards my home. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I breathed rapidly when I finally reached home safely. The next day, when I went to get my bike, I saw that it had been smashed to pieces.